Disclaimer, everyone. What we have for today is an attempt at warning all of you, at sort of reining in your excitement about your choice of what to play in Dragonflight. This is, after all, the most busy moment for an expansion when players will get into the usual roulette, the usual dance of trying to decide what you want to play, which role first of all, and then which race, even why not which class, and then which spec. Eventually you start asking around, you start watching streams, perhaps videos, perhaps guides, until eventually you settle for what you want to play. Now, this is also the time where you start finally hearing about the performance of each of the specs you were interested in playing. The raid testing has been going on in the beta for a few weeks now. There has been Mythic Plus testing as well for a couple of weeks already. So you start inevitably hearing about certain specs doing well, certain other specs doing less well than others. So you start getting essentially into this pre idea of a meta. You start hearing about, oh yeah, this spec is OP, oh yeah, this spec is doing really well right now. So you start getting yourself an idea of what is good, what could be strong for the next expansion, right? The disclaimer for today's video is trying to warn all of you that everything you have been hearing up until now is completely and utterly worthless, okay? This is very important as to not bait you into choosing a spec purely and solely because you have heard it being very strong right now. That is the main problem. It is perfectly fine, and you are welcome now that the pre-patch is out to test all of the specs and try out how engaging and enjoyable and fun they are to play because of the talent options, because of their rotations, their buttons and whatnot. Try them in the raid, try them in Mythic Plus. That is okay. That has nothing to do with how early or how late you are in the beta. That is how a spec is going to play. Where the tricky part comes in is trying to stave off the need to play or not play a certain spec or class because you have heard or you have seen a certain spec being very strong right now. You know, we could already come to these conclusions because we have numbers, we have data, we have recordings of specs performances. So for example, take Enhancement Shaman. Right? Enhancement Shaman is, for example, right now, one of the better performing specs in the raid testing of Dragonflight. They are constantly very high up in the damage done, generally speaking, the top 2, top 3 of specs for damage. But even in Mythic Plus, not just in the raid, they are also doing very well. They are, generally speaking, amongst the highest damage dealers in Mythic Plus keys, consistently. You can pair together with Enhancement another spec, like Windwalker. Windwalker is pretty much mirroring the results of Enhancement, perhaps not as powerful in the raid in the results so far, but definitely more in Mythic Plus, right? So if we had to gauge things right now, the two strongest specs for you to take in general as a DPS would be Enhancement and Windwalker. Those would be the specs performing the best in the beta right now when it comes to DPS. We can continue, for the record, we can continue to go even further. At the moment, there is only one healer who is clearly over-damaging every other healer in Mythic Plus. So, by default, because of how important the healer damage is in Mythic Plus, they are putting themselves as first in line in terms of priority when it comes to Mythic Plus healers, in terms of meta, which is Evoker. Preservation Evoker right now is even as far as doubling the damage done of quite a few other healers. In particular, Holy Priest has much lower down damage. Other specs like Resto Shaman, Discipline Priest and Resto Druid and even Mistweaver Monk are only doing 50% less damage than a Preservation Evoker, and the closest one, 30-ish% less damage or so, is Holy Paladin. The thing is, with this set of data, is that it is very deceitful. It is very dangerous to trust these things right now because they are still very much bound to be changed. The general disclaimer that needs to be done for today is trying to invite the players to enjoy their time in trying their new talents, perhaps even as you tinker around with your new UI in the pre-patch, without putting too much weight and too much value in the current numbers of the beta. I know it might feel bad. You will see players around you. Perhaps if you are a habitual user of the class discourse, you will constantly get barraged by posts and comments and messages about the damage of certain other specs and classes, players being jealous, seething, or getting triggered at the damage of other specs. So it will be very difficult to ignore all of this, right? But you need to prove to be the better man or the stronger woman and ignore all of this, at least for a little bit more, okay? At the moment, there simply isn't enough proof, there simply isn't enough data to be certain, to be sure that what is to come in Dragonflight is reflected in the numbers we see in the beta. You will know. You will know when you can start taking these numbers more seriously. And you will know because I will be showing up with a bell. I will be ringing on my video to announce to the world that you can now finally start taking these numbers more seriously and start thinking about what to play in Dragonflight with these numbers more in mind. For now, we are still too far away that these numbers are just too volatile at the moment. For example, you have situations still happening right now in the beta where routinely you have tanks out-damaging DPS specs. This is not uncommon whatsoever in the beta. Particularly Vengeance Demon Hunter and Protection Paladin are the worst offender of this crime. They are doing tons and tons of damage. Or you could see it on the opposite side. There are some DPS specs that are doing far less damage than they should. Now obviously this is not what is going to happen, I hope at least. This is not what is going to happen by the time Dragonflight releases, so there are plenty of things that are simply yet way too uncertain to start basing something as important as choosing your character and choosing what you're going to be playing in Dragonflight purely because you have heard in a Discord channel or in a Reddit comment or in a Twitch stream that Bob said that this spec is OP because they are totally stomping Mythic Plus keys in the beta. That is simply just way too unreliable. It's a way too untested way to just make up your decision on what you want to play. At the moment, I think it's simply a much more safe way and a much more stable way for you as you start thinking about what you want to play in the next expansion by simply looking at how each specs are playing in the pre-patch. You know, you have just gotten the pre-patch today or yesterday, so you have the specs playing very similar to how they will play after the release at max level. Because we have no borrowed powers, because the tier sets won't really change the gameplay, and because you're only missing 10 or so talents, most of the stuff you will be playing with at max level, fully decked in epics, doing Mythic Plus keys in Dragonflight will be very similar to what you're doing in the pre-patch already. So you can get a pretty good idea of what you're gonna be doing in Dragonflight with your character even now in the pre-patch. So that should be a bigger push, a bigger indicator of where should you lean in what to play on each of the classes and specs, rather than getting swayed by what you have heard or what you have seen specs can do in terms of power and performance. Even in this very own video, right? Don't do the exact opposite of what I'm suggesting and simply look at the images of the damage I've been showing you and take it as this means Windwalker is OP. I better reroll a Windwalker right now, or I'm gonna miss out on the flavor of the month for the first season of Dragonflight. That is definitely what you shouldn't do, at the very least for now. There will come a point in a few weeks, I wanna say, conservatively speaking, a couple of weeks, where we will be close enough to the release and the numbers tuning of Blizzard will have slowed down by enough of a number, and we will also be getting more precise ways to judge the specs performances, like for example having more and more simulations available where we will be able to see much more clearly if certain specs are looking to be powerful or not, with way less time for Blizzard to push out much bigger changes. So in a few weeks time, yes, it will be acceptable for you to start getting swayed by all of these numbers, all of these results, and all of these performances being shared around the community. If, for example, enhancement is slamming the meters in the raid and in Mythic Plus now, and then a week goes by and nothing changes, 2 weeks go by and nothing changes, 3 weeks go by and it's 10 days away from the expansion and still nothing has changed, then yeah, clearly it looks like things are going well for enhancement. But for the moment, it's still a little bit too early to get baited by numbers. That was the disclaimer and the PSA I wanted to broadcast to the player base as we get closer to the release of Dragonflight. So when it comes to choosing what you want to play for Dragonflight, just look at this pre-patch as if it were out in 2 different phases, kind of like it actually is in-game. The first phase is test the talents, look at how fun the spec plays, how entertaining they are to play with all of their new different things. And then the second phase is, once we have gotten more balanced tuning and we have gotten closer to the release and there is not that much time left and it's much more clear which specs are doing well and which specs are doing not well in terms of numbers, that is when you can start taking the results that have been happening in the beta, for example, more seriously. That is how I would, and that is how I will divide my choices in what to play and in sort of deciding based on what looks strong in Dragonflight. I'm certainly not going to raise an issue right now if certain specs, if Balanced Druid, for example, is getting out-damaged by half the tanks. I know that's not what's going to happen by the time Dragonflight is released, so I wouldn't worry too much for the moment. I would, however, progressively get more and more worried as we get closer to the release and this situation for the spec doesn't change that much. That would, of course, become way more worrying. But for now, I wouldn't really bother too much about numbers. That was the entire point of this video. So, hoping I have calmed down a few of you who were a little bit worried about what they have heard, the voices in the corridors, the whispers and the rumors about the performances of the specs, trying to calm you down in pointing out that at the moment it's not that relevant and there is still plenty of time for Blizzard to change many of these results coming from the beta. We can now leave each other on this Wednesday. Now, of course, as usual, I'm starting the leaving process by thanking all of my Patreon supporters for being a big part in contributing to supporting myself and this channel, allowing me to continue to produce more content. You can, of course, support the channel by doing so in other ways than spending money, which include liking and commenting down below on this very video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. These methods are still completely free of charge, for the moment, at least according to YouTube, so shouldn't be that big of a hassle. Lastly, for more social interactions and general parasocial behaviors, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right at these 2 links. With this being said and done, I have to leave you because I have to go eat. I was supposed to be eating somewhere in the range of 6 hours ago, and I believe I delayed this by a little bit too much already. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, no, it actually has gotten quite problematic. I have delayed this so long that now I am closer to the time I have to go to sleep than the time I have to go to eat. So now I am kind of wondering if it's worth eating at all.